Yeah, my wife has said many times that the falling in love part is fun. It's great.
Yeah.
That chase is, you like to be chased and blah blah blah. But this work of love, you know, kind of is. It is beautiful, but it is work.
Yeah, no, and it can be hard, you know. And it's funny, you know, if you don't choose to strap in for it, like things fall apart really quickly.
Agree.
You know, and I was always there, you know, but I think I've always thrived on drama. You know, it's whether it's been placed in front of me or I've invented it, you know, and you got to find a way, I think, when in life to live without that sometimes, you know, and in a lot of senses, I think the challenge to me on this record was like, how do I talk about these things, and when it's done, you know, ultimately end up in a place where my feet, both feet are on the ground, and I'm in the middle of my art, and I'm creating regularly, and I'm inspired regularly, you know, and how do I find source inspiration where it's not all about drama, you know, and I think that's the mission that I've been on, and I feel like I'm standing there, you know, as a result, and I'm pretty happy about that.
So we're in the midst of this beautiful Meijer garden back room with all the plants.
We're in a greenhouse. It's definitely
it's my first interview in a greenhouse, and it's kind of cool.
Man, yeah.
It is sweet. How about that huge plant right there? Is that the coolest thing?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's like, could I have one of those in my yard?
Yeah.
I wonder if it can live in a yard. Maybe you could live in your garden in California.
I have those in my yard, actually.
Oh, do you? Oh,
not
okay.
that big.
Yeah.
I think it might. It's not an agave. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a desert. I think it's a desert plant, though. So I think it can live just about anywhere. Yeah,
it's sweet. Where are you going with Release Me? Because that's, you know, I think it's about the pressures in life and of life, but we must let those things go to live life.
Right.
It's such a, it feels paradoxical, but it can work.
Yeah. I think, you know, along the way on this album, you know, there were some roadblocks in the business world and in the you know, and just in getting along with people in my life. You know, there were a couple of, you know, touch and go moments. You know, my whole goal with this album was like, we're Passenger. There was so much of that on Passenger that it really just created a lot of false starts on that record, and a lot of that record was made under duress. My goal with Release Me was not with Release Me, with this record in general, was to not place the creative in the center of some storm, you know, and so there were moments on this record that I think I had to kind of, like, where the tension just built so in such a frantic way that it was like I got to the end of it, and it was like the record was supposed to be done in January, and now I'm back in the studio. I'm working more, you know, and it's like, and it was great. It was the best thing that could have happened to the record. But there was certainly a moment where I was like, I am done with this, you know, and I believe in it. I'm ready for it to be done. And Release Me was kind of that, like, you know, just the building up of all of these months of the things that build up when you're creating something that has kind of a high stake attached to it.
Right.
And a lot of that was literal. I mean, a lot of it's figurative too, but there is a literal, like, just please, like, I'm at this moment is past. I'm ready to move forward.
Yeah, my fuse is set. I'm pressing go. I love that. Yeah, sort of.
You know, and that was the deal. It was like and there was there's always pressure from the record company at the end of an album to do another song. I feel like that's like something they teach you in A&R 101. When the band turns in the record, always make sure you ask them to do one more song. And I understand why, because a lot of times the best songs come out of that
pressure-filled moment.
Totally.
Right. Yeah.
But when it happened again on this one, I was just like, all right, here we go. You know, and so
I'll play the game. Actually, you should just be holding a couple songs right in the back seat, and you go, oh yeah, I'll go back and work on those, and you just go home and take a nap and go, here they are.
But I'm always down for that challenge, because I think a lot of times the writing assignment stuff can really lead to like a sort of stream of consciousness that like that can pan out really well.
No, you know, I've talked with a lot of people. I mean, Ed Roland, I'm thinking of specifically here. Yeah. It's just like he'd take the record back to Atlantic for Collective Soul, and they'd go, we don't hear the hit, or we don't hear this, or we don't hear that, and it's like, okay, goes back and he's just, I don't even know what that song's about. All I know is I had to write it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of weird pressure that makes art.
Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of good art made under pressure, you know, and I think frankly the major label game is in a lot of ways about surviving under pressure. You know, there's no question about it. It's not pointing a finger at the labels by any means.
Right.
You know, it's what we all sign up for. But when you have a huge company looking to somehow continue to survive because your art survives, it can create a dynamic that can be scary for creativity, and I think a lot of people buckle under that pressure.
Hey, the song Amy, I want to jump to that to kind of jump over television.
Yeah.
But I think I love when people write about loneliness because I think there's a lot of it out there.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's where you're going down on that road for somebody.
Yeah, it was one of these songs I wrote. I wrote that song and People Running in Nashville with my buddy Matt Thiessen from Reliant K.
Yeah, I love Matt.
Yeah, and it started. We went out the night before. Matt's definitely been like an old friend of my, like from the party days, on the Warped Tour and stuff, and us
Sure.
going out in 08 and having a lot of fun, and we had talked a lot about getting together and just seeing what happened if we tried to write some songs.
Sure.
And I woke up in the morning in his guest room in his house in Nashville and was walking around on these creaky floorboards and looking out at the snow on the ground. I mean, very literal. I mean, the intro is very literal and very visual. And I think, we were in two very different places in our lives when that song was written, both of us.
You and Matt. Right.
I was standing very much in the middle of my relationship, and he, I think, not to tell his story for him, but I think at that moment he was kind of in a bit of a wander and a search mode.
Yep.
And so I think in a way it really kind of made it possible for us to talk about this idea of lost love from two really sort of distinctly unique angles.
Right, right.
And I think there's a reality to, like, anytime regardless of marriage, but if you're in a relationship, you do drift into these thought patterns that involve people that you've been with in the past.
Sure.
Whether or not that's a smart thing for me to admit or not, it's true. And anybody who says otherwise is a liar.
Right.
And I think we wanted to talk about that idea of this intangible, this intangible thing, this love that's out there in the distance, and you're never going to see them again, and that's never going to be a part of your world again.
Right.
But it's still in the back of your head.
Yeah, or it's still twirling around in your heart somehow or another, right?
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean that you're still in love with that person, but I think there is but that certain people along your path are going to touch you in a way that just because you've moved on doesn't mean that there isn't a feeling there to some extent,
Yeah, the opening line for People Running, we're just people, happy tangled lives.
Yeah.
But it goes on to what I think is great is we're only chemical and skin, barely strapped in.
For this air-conditioned drive.
Dude, that is great stuff.
Well, part of that was, my cousin, he and I are really close, and he's sort of one of my sources for great art and inspiration, and he was reading me excerpts out of Herman Miller's Air Conditioned Nightmare, which is a very kind of critical look at America. I think,
really?
I want to say the 60s maybe. He was an expat that came back. It could have been actually earlier than that even. But I loved this idea of air conditioning as such a metaphor for humanity,
Yes,
especially,
exactly.
this comfortable sort of sinking in while the world burns outside something, but I also wanted to talk about this human search from a place of, like, there's the reality of all of us searching, but there is a reality to, like, things are in a lot of senses the way they are, and the way they will be, and you can change what you can change, but to live a life sort of pent up in frustration and anxiety over what we can't change, even while you watch it before your eyes and you're not pleased with it, is a dangerous way to live too. And I think that was sort of, why I included. I mean, I wrote the title of the album, "People and Things," came before the song "People Running." But I wanted to write a song. I like that the second, the top of the second verse, that we are just these people, such tragic little things.
Yep.
But followed by kind of what I think is the best bit of comedy on the record. The line about taking your girlfriend to a drug deal and falling in love.
Yes. I saw.
Because I think that's real. I mean, and I think we got. I wanted this record to be rooted in reality.
Well, I found a piece from the, we're just people running around and I'm in no hurry to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me that's this tortured guy still trying to, I want to figure all this stuff out and don't paint it black. I want to see everything, but my dad died when he was in his 80s and he didn't figure it all out.
No.
So I don't know if your Uncle Stu did or anybody has really.
I don't think anybody does. I think that, I think the people who get closest, you can almost spot them in a crowd because they just look a little bit better off than the rest of us,
Yeah, somebody who's really comfortable in their shoes, what I mean?
I think the people who understand it best are the people who know what fight's worth fighting and know which ones to let go of.
Yeah, wow.
I really do. I struggle with that every day.
Sure.
But my best days are the ones where I can, smile at some of the wackiness of what goes on in this world and try and let it happen and do my best to at least project a positive vibe in hopes that people will latch on to that and it'll affect some sort of change in that sense.
One thing that I'm still trying to learn is to enjoy this journey that is life rather than have this end goal, and try to enjoy the journey. I think that's where you're going with hey, we're all going to die.
Absolutely.
Is we've got to pay attention, if you will, right?
Yeah, with that song, it's like, that was an old holdout from The Glass Passenger, but I didn't finish it until after I had
saw the lyric
completed
was in
the
there.
record, But I sort of love the idea of just as starkly as humanly possible telling the story of what led up, the days leading up to when I got sick, and because there's been this grand obsession over that period of time in my life, and so when I wrote it, it was like, this is what happened. I was in Philadelphia. My voice was really starting to get bad. The whole label was there because all of a sudden the record's buzzing and people are getting excited. And I'm driving to New York because all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of press for the album. And now there's, and it's like, and the whole time I'm in the van driving back to the gig and I'm shaking and I'm like, and I don't know why. But there's this inertia to this whole thing. But that, and that each verse you just get to the chorus and it's like, hey, and I love the idea of celebrating that. Like, this was maybe arguably the shittiest thing that happened to me, but shitty things happen to every one of us, and in a way, I think there's, you get put on a pedestal when you go through something like this, and you, especially if you're already on a pedestal, like musicians and entertainers are, then you go through this and then people all of a sudden turn you into into some other thing that just isn't reality, and I kind of like that this song sort of takes the piss out of that a little bit.
I love that. Well, is Casting Lines somewhere in that vicinity too?
Yeah, well, I think Casting Lines was in a lot of ways is sort of like the most sort of like existential thing on this, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm wondering.
I wrote that song for as a TV show theme. Seriously,
this existential TV show theme.
I'm glad that at the end of the day it was Bob Dylan who ended up beating me out for it. But
right, yeah, that's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah. But it was sort of there was actually, strangely enough, to tie back to television, there was a moment when my friend and I, Jaron, who I wrote television with, we wanted to write a song about our families, our parents. And we really, this was like, we started out and it just drifted into this other space when we couldn't pull that off,
Right, okay.
And then this TV show called Parenthood approached me for a theme song. And I like taking these kind of writing assignments. They rarely pan out. Music supervisors are a hard lot to please.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's just the reality. But it was almost like, oh wow, somebody else is like, this idea has come back up. Like,
yeah, right.
So it came back from another place, but somehow it's back on my doorstep. This idea of like trying to write a song about family. You know, not the kind of family, you know, that like, you know, marriages, I mean, are rooted, but I think people have really, you know, that institution has taken a hit.
Yeah, right.
You know, over many, many years. You can't unwind from family. You know, you can't unwind from your parents. And so though I'm not a parent myself, when they came to me about this song, I was like, I want to try and write a song about being a son, you know, and being a brother.
Interesting.
And it developed into, I think, a bigger thing, but, you know, it was very much about the how we all have these divergent roads. And even in a family, you know, you end up, you know, I've been a known wanderer, but you know, you can't escape your family. You know, I think even when I did transit, I was barely talking to anybody in my family for a while. It wasn't because I didn't love them. It was just because I was like, I'm out here, woo, you know, like, and
finding your own feet.
Yeah. And then, but being sick all of a sudden brought me right back to their doorstep. And then these were the people who were like,
there for
I mean, they
everything.
You know, they got me through it. You know, I was sleeping on my parents' couch all day long, and they were coming back from work to make sure I was, you know, I mean, it was like, you know, and so I in a lot of senses, I consider Casting Lines a song, you know, that I wrote for them.
I was also into the song Restless Dream because I love the idea that we become obsessed, I think, sort of with something internally and never speak it. But yet we drive around with it sort of on the front burner all the time. We don't share it.
It's my favorite lyric on the record is, it's funny how the words we never say will turn into the only thoughts we know. Yeah.
Look what I underlined there.
Yeah. It's definitely, I mean.
That's exactly it, man.
That to me, I think, in a lot of senses, is one of the truest things said on the whole album.
Yeah.
You know?
Powerful.
And again, that was, I wrote, that was another writing assignment kind of tune, but that was the most quickly I've ever written and recorded a song ever. I wrote it in the morning before I drove to the studio and recorded it that day and finished it that day. And I think I just, you know, I found myself connecting to this thought of you know, the way that, and I always have looked at my life as a road and a journey with a lot of side paths and, you know, and a lot, you know what I mean? And a lot of these kind of like, you know, it's just, I just have a very kind of visual sense of how life spans, you know, and I think, you know, we go on these other roads and oftentimes we realize, okay, that wasn't the right one. I'm going back. I got the main path now. I'm on it, you know, but the things that you find out there inform everything. And I think that's sort of where this song lies for me on this record.
Yeah. Well, do people like Amelia Jean, that song title? Do somehow they have to escape to go find life?
Yeah, I mean,
they just can't find it where they're at.
Yeah, and I mean,
it's always out there.
Yeah, you know, it's weird. It's like the Amelia Jean, you know, is very much like in a way a reference, you know, back to my wife. You know, I mean, ultimately, like you know, the beginning of those words were like found in a bar in Richmond after I had driven, you know, 9 or so days across the country, very much with the permission of my wife. You know, like I had gotten in my car, I was going to go to Vegas for a couple of days, and my best friend was living in Vegas at the time, and this was during Passenger, and at that point, nobody, you know, I thought the record was finished. I thought Passenger was finished, and I started playing it for the record company, and they didn't agree. And I had at that point, I had an A&R guy, a label president, and another label president, and all of them had differing opinions on where the record stood. and I was, you know, I had gotten up to like, you know, nearly $100,000 in the hole of my own money, paying to make this music because they didn't support it at the time.
Right. Wow.
And I was just I was a mess, and I was like, I've just got to go. I'm gonna go pick up a keyboard in Vegas. I'm gonna sit in my buddy's house and just write some songs and just get out of Los Angeles. And I got out of LA 10 minutes, and I was like, this feels so good.
Really?
I was like, this feels so good, just driving.
Yeah. And
I called my wife and I said, I know you're gonna think this is crazy, but I think I just need to drive for a while. And she's like, you're not leaving. I'm like, I swear, no, I'm not leaving. I'm just driving. And she said, of course, go do it. You know, and that's kind of, and in a weird way, I mean, this is a song that didn't end up on that record. It ended up on this record, and it ended up on this record because I think, you know, there are songs like that, like Amelia Jean and Hostage and Platform Fire, you know, that are very much about this idea of the deepest form of love can be this ability to let somebody leave to find themselves so that they can come back more complete, you know. And the thing is, I've always been a bit of a loner, you know, and that's just a reality of my life, you know. And I've always been a troubadour, and I moved every 3 years growing up as a kid. You know, I find comfort in constant motion. Yeah. You know, and I think it's been a part of my relationship, you know, for 10 years with my wife, that it's something that the understanding of that is so paramount to our relationship, you know. And Amelia Jean, it's this story. It's like I drove to Nashville when she got a call from her sister, and her sister's going, "What the hell are you doing, letting him drive around the country?" You know what I mean? And I felt like when it came to recording this record, to leave it off would be so crazy because, you know, in a lot of senses, I made a second trip back from Richmond on this record when I had my meltdown during this album. Okay, you know, and ended up back in California, and on what I consider my return voyage, you know, 2-3 years later. But that, you know, that's just been a part of my life for a while.
Yeah, I just wonder, you know, when my wife and I always think I can help her fix things, right? So I'm saying, stay here, don't go for a drive, I'll help you fix it. Right. When really the best thing just might be, it's okay to go for that drive. And even if it's 2 hours or maybe it's 2 days. Yeah. Right? Or 2 weeks or 2 months.
I recommend it to anybody. You know, I think there's something beautiful that happens when you driving by yourself. You know, and when you finally get to a road that's a little more open and you're not worried about your speed and you're just kind of like cruising. Yeah. But at least for me, it's like...
It's almost meditative, isn't it?
It's totally meditative. It is my purest form of meditation is driving.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely. And you know, but I think, you know, there's a thing where people are afraid to be alone, you know, and I think we find ourselves buried in technology and buried in so many things these days that make it easy to be distracted. But I've found that in a world with constant sort of stimulus, that the most stimulated I am is when I turn all of that shit off and get in a car and drive, and all of a sudden I feel like the truth kind of just fans out before me, you know. And truthfully, on both of these albums, the last 2 albums, Glass Passenger and People and Things, this moment of turning the phone off, and you know, and leaving the computer at home and getting in the car and driving for days have really informed the process. Yeah, I'm afraid, you know, like Into the Wild would be, you know, a little too attractive. You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, yeah. For me, it's like I'm so tethered, you know, and I love people so much, it's how I reset. It's almost how I reset myself.
That's interesting. That's cool.
But I don't think I'd ever be in the Alaska wild by myself for too long. You know?
Yeah, I think too long is the problem, right? And even the end line of the movie, right, is it's better if we share things or whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, there is something about sharing this space.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between searching for something and, you know, and becoming a recluse or something. Yeah, right. I think they're two very different things.
Are you seeing your own life from a distance in Platform Fire?
From a distance. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I mean, I like that. I think, I think it is sort of a very holistic view of my world. So in that sense, I guess you could say it's from a distance. You know, it's an interesting thing to be an entertainer for a living. You know, I think, I mean, it's an awesome thing. It's the best thing. It's the only thing I'd want to do.
Yeah, it's who you are.
But it certainly changes the way you live. And I think it also, it creates at times a disconnect from other people because you see yourself as different or something from time to time. And I think in a sense, this song was started maybe as as some sort of expository statement about that, and ultimately, like everything, kind of you realize along the way that it may be a different lifestyle, but that we all do the tightrope walk in our day-to-day lives, and that's why I think it made it feel okay to talk about this and not feel indulgent or look at me on the stage kind of thing, because I think the last line is really appropriate. It's I'm a man on a wire and you're talking me through. Where I think is that like juxtaposed against all these other lines about you're here for the view that are a little bit more indulged and whatever. But I think it tells a pretty honest story about there are nights where I'm up there and I feel unhinged and I
weightless,
sort of and I always manage, I think, to keep it together for the most part. But that's also because there is this vision of home that in a sense, every night I go out there and do it. It's what I love to do, but it's a part of my road home too, and I think the fact that touring has found its way into my life the way it has, it's like it's such a metaphor for my life. This idea of the wander and the return, it's constant.
Just Jacoby from Papa Roach just said, we're just hunters and gatherers. We go out, we hunt and gather, and we go back home. And
I can see that.
That was an interesting scenario too, right?
Yeah.
Hey, the thing about driving, I loved it in To Go to the In Valleys EP.
I love it. That's a cool
at full speed. I mean, right there, it seems like you see what you want, but you're out there searching for it too, and not knowing exactly what it is, but it's around you or it's in you or whatever.
It sums up a lot of Passenger for me, that song.
Yeah.
I wish I had found a bigger home for it. And I wish I had played it more when it came out.
People will find it. The ones who need to find it, I think, will find it.
That's a sad song for me, in a lot of senses, because I was so lost for so much of that record. I was just like, it was the hardest time in my whole life was making that record. And
alone on a road going nowhere. That's a heavy line.
Yeah, and it just for me, that song it says a lot about what that was like, because I think I was so lost because I thought I would be so found at that period of time in my life. I thought the aftermath of everything that had happened, following transit and everything, I thought I would be on a beach and with the sun coming down and that life would be this beautiful thing. And we talked about earlier, I went
answers
so hard.
would fall on you.
I went so hard the other direction so fast that I quickly, I found myself trying to gain ground in such a forceful way that it was impossible to gain any, and even when I went on that first road trip, the end of it was me in Costa Rica on a vendor. You know what I mean? I wound up in a foreign country, like a mess. And
see, that's when I think your wife has got to say, now, wait a minute, I let you go, but I didn't let you go to Costa Rica to go on a bender.
She did.
I'm just saying.
I know.
I'm just saying that's what I would say.
That was the part of the road where, as I got to the East Coast and I was like, wait a minute, I'm just not ready to come back. And I met up with a buddy and I was like, let's.
Meeting up with a buddy is not good.
Yeah. Well, I was on this very Kerouacian kick or something, and I called and I said, I think I'm going to dump my car in Virginia and put it on a truck and then fly to Costa Rica and fly home. And that was definitely the moment where it was like, are you kidding me? And then and we had a really honest conversation about she's like, well, what about when I want to do this?
Yeah, right.
And that's where the line though, Amelia Jean, I'm sure you'll get your turn.
Yeah, right.
Right. It was a really tricky time.
What happens when you're in that selfish mode? And I'm throwing that on you, right?
No, it's okay. I'll take it.
When you're in that place, because I even think when I'm making that phone call, I know I'm in a selfish place, but IGD deserve it.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's it kind of masks everything that I think that I'm supposed to share with somebody that I love is my own selfishness for the sake of, I'm an artist, I got to do this.
You got to get yours. Yeah,
right. You know, and I don't. Yeah, it's fair or unfair. I don't know what.
It's a fine line, you know, right. And I think art is creation can be a selfish enterprise.
Yeah, right.
You know, I think, it ultimately, I think it results in a serious sense of giving, when things are complete. But when you make things for a living, it's very easy to get caught up in your own space. And I'm not really proud of a lot of the selfishness that came out of that period of time in my life. I'm not at all, to be honest, and I think this record was sort of a reckoning of that. I think People and Things was me waking up to sort of I think the element of that was really unhealthy and wrong, and sort of trying to put that down in a place and say, okay, like, in a weird way, I think People and Things is very much about that period of time in my life, and playing catch up, because there was so much I didn't talk about then because I was so caught up in my recovery and my thing in this selfish sort of moment, or handling a moment that shouldn't have been selfishly, I guess.
I wonder, but
you at some point you have to forgive yourself for things, and I think, in that sense, this album is kind of a love letter, in the same way that Transit was. It's a deeper, sort of different kind of love letter, but it's very much, trying to say, okay, this is how this all began, but like, I like that Casting Lines is the last song on this record because it says, like, for all this wreckage and for all of the carnage along the way, like, we do come home, and I think a lot of this record was about the completion of that journey that started with Transit, and it was a selfish journey. I'm proud of a lot of it, but it certainly put me on a road alone on a lot of days.